Hey, fellow Wagoneers. I'm glad you're here today because we're going to do an experiment on how to feed a lot of people good barbecue for not a lot of money. And the protein we're going to use is good old-fashioned pork loin. My wife says I enjoy doing that too much and that I need to stop doing it in the store. But I don't know if I can.
Ha ha! Loins.
Anyway, the pork loin, not to be confused with its better half, the pork tenderloin, is a cheap cut because it's so lean. And because it's so lean, it can be easily overcooked. But if cooked properly, it can be a very, very versatile thing. It can be a whole roast. It can be cut into thick boneless pork chops. It can be sliced and put into sandwiches like Cubans. This one here is just over 5 pounds and just under $10. And this is half a loin. A whole loin you can get at Costco, Sam's, maybe even your grocery store for a lot less per pound than that. So the plan is we're going to brine it overnight. That will help it to retain its moisture and impart a little bit of flavor. The next day we're going to get a nice rub on it and get it into the Dyna-Glo and smoke it for around 2 hours. It doesn't take long to cook. But before we pull it, we're going to paint it up real good with some barbecue sauce to give it a nice glaze. And we're going to pull it at 135 internal, not 145. And I'll get more into why on that later. But for now, let's get brining and let's get rolling. There's just no way I can stop doing that. The first step to brining anything is figuring out how much water you will need to get your brine ratio correct. To do that, I like to put my still wrap protein in the container I'm going to use and fill it with tap water, counting the cups I will need until I have about an inch above the protein. Then I dump that water into my plants. I'm going to need 12 cups. Now into a good clean pot, I will add good clean drinking water and turn the heat to very low. Next, I will add kosher salt for my brine. Let's pause here a sec to talk salt. Not all salt is measured equally. For example, Diamond Crystal kosher salt, like I'm using here, is 10 grams per tablespoon. Morton's kosher salt is 15 grams per tablespoon, and table salt is 20 grams per tablespoon. So here's a handy conversion guide to use for just about any brine. Anyway, I will need 12 tablespoons total. I like to use Diamond Crystal because it dissolves more easily and it's also great for rubs. To that, I'm also going to add 1 tablespoon of brown sugar per cup of water to impart a bit of molasses flavor into the pork. It took me a minute to figure out 12 tablespoons was actually 3 1/4 cups. Whisk vigorously until your salt and sugar has dissolved and then turn off the heat and let cool to room temp. Now let's put it all together. Get your now unwrapped pork into your container and add the brine. Now it's time for some aromatics, like 2 large bay leaves, 4 cloves of garlic, a tablespoon of peppercorns, 1/4 of an onion, broken apart, and half a dried ancho chili pepper if you have one. Can you add other things? Sure. Other ideas are fresh rosemary or parsley, coriander seeds, dried mushrooms, or maybe a different dried pepper. Then just cover and refrigerate at least overnight. While the brine is doing its thing, let's talk wood. I'm using a 1 cubic foot bag of B&B apple splits, and I'm going to chop them a little bit smaller. Pecan, cherry, or hickory would also be great. Personally, I would not use post oak, but if that's all you have, that's fine. Now, can you use chunks instead of splits? Sure. But then you'll have to add more charcoal for the cook, and I don't like to do that. To learn more about why I do it this way, and a whole lot more, head on over to my Dyna-Glo tutorial at the link above or in the description. I usually pick these bags up at Ace or Academy Sports. This one had 12 splits in it that I converted to 29 pieces. Through the magic of time travel, I happen to know that I ended up using 8 of those pieces for this cook, or about 25% of the bag. The bag cost me $27, so fuel cost and wood came to just $6.75. After I prepped the wood, the missus got on me about not getting the Halloween decorations done. Well, turns out it took me 2 days. So the brine ended up being 48 hours, not overnight.
48 hours?
Well, it was more like 42 hours actually. Hey, I learned this trick on America's Test Kitchen. Put down a wet paper towel to keep your cutting board from sliding around. It works! So, remove your loin from the brine, rinse and pat dry. You can see from the coloration that the brine really penetrated the meat, and at this moment I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Spoiler alert, turns out it was a good thing. Now, I'm putting down a yellow mustard binder that I think works well with pork, but you can use a different mustard or an oil or nothing at all. Usually I would make my own rub for this, but since the focus on this loin is to be inexpensive, I don't want to use my good stuff. I went with a $3 pork rub by Fiesta. It has the usual suspects like paprika, chili pepper, onion, garlic, as well as salt, sugar, and MSG. Get a good amount on over the entire loin, whatever you're using. Another optional step is trussing it up so it cooks a bit more evenly. To be honest, I don't know if this really had much effect. Lastly, but probably most importantly, get a probe into the thickest part of the loin, if you have one. While the pork loin is chilling, let's head out to the Dyna and start her up. Now, normally I dump a lit chimney of coals in the basket, but I don't really love all the sparks that fly around and drop on the ground. So I'm trying something new and dumping unlit coals in the basket and lighting just one side by using 2 fire starters that I light in the ashtray below the coals. Of course, also remove all the racks you don't need and add your water pan to the lowest rack to help keep things clean and regulate the heat. I'm also going to add an extra probe so I can monitor the smoker temp remotely. Once the coals are ashed a bit, I go ahead and add 2 pieces of wood, one on top of the unlit side and one on the lit side. After about 10 minutes, all the white smoke is gone and the wood is smoldering nicely, and it's time to put the loin on and set my probes. The loin probe I set to 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and the smoker cabinet probe I set to a range of 220 to 280 degrees, but aiming for a steady 250. However, things quickly escalated above 280. Maybe I used too many coals, I don't know. So I shut the firebox door and moved the side vent to halfway. And it didn't take too long until everything was right as rain again. The temp was good and Walter was on patrol. Now, once the coals begin to die off, all my heat is coming from just the wood. So of course I need to add more wood from time to time and adjust vents to keep it going so I stay in that barbecue range. After just an hour, the loin was already at 100 degrees, so I decided to rotate it and give it a good barbecue bath. Oh yeah, I wish somebody would do that for me. Honey?
No way. No freaking way.
Oh well. Just 45 minutes later, it was at 135 in the thickest part and 145-ish in the thinner parts.
Says you're done if you're a pork loin.
Total time in the smoker was 1 hour 45 minutes. And that's the thing about brining I find. Proteins seem to cook quicker. Anyway, I'm going to tent it, put the probe back in, and let it sit for 20 minutes. And while it's resting, let's talk about pork. Today's pigs are not the same as your mama's, or maybe even your grandmama's. The disease trichinosis has largely been eliminated in the US, which is why the USDA changed the minimum temperature to cook pork back in 2011. 145 is now considered medium rare, and that's what I want. However, if I pull it at 145 and let it rest, as you should, the carryover cooking will take it to 150 or higher, which I don't want. So I pull it at 135 and let time do its thing. There's a good article on this by Bon Appetit I will leave a link to in the description. But hey, it's been 20 minutes and it's time to cut those damn strings and see how we did. All right, let's give it a cut. I'm going to cut it right here in the middle. Looks pretty tender and juicy. All right, let me slice off a piece here. That is very tender. Not dry at all. The barbecue gives it a nice flavor. Very delicious. And you can see if I slice it real thin, this could be used perfectly as a Cuban or for a Cuban sandwich. The 48-hour brine worked pretty good, actually. You can always on a steak. It's not salty or anything like that. You do get a lot of flavor on the interior of the meat, which maybe I wouldn't have got if I just did the 24-hour brine. So I did get some of that flavor from the pepper, from the onion, from the garlic. I get a little bit of heat from the ancho chili pepper that I put in there. It's really quite good. Very delicious, very tender, an easy way to feed a lot of people for an inexpensive amount of money. It's almost foolproof. All in all, I'd say this is a success. I think you should try it. And if you like the recipe and you want to try it on your Dyna, let me know how it turns out. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time down the dusty trail of the chuck wagon.